All right, we're going to kick things off here with a little review of basically solving one and two-step equations. And we're going to review a couple of things. First of all, we are going to be reviewing this concept of flipped learning. What are the expectations? Well, the expectations are, as you remember, you're going to be watching a video, taking notes. And of course, we're going to use headphones to avoid distractions. And any questions that you have, there is a spot in the packets you're going to be receiving to where you can ask questions, write down the questions. So make sure you utilize that heading into this new format that we're going to utilize. And so beyond the taking of the notes, then we will be doing practice and checking our answers as we go. We're going to be looking for mistakes, common misconceptions, and hopefully in that process, you will be more fluent in solving equations, one and two-step equations. And so that's what this first lesson is really all about. And then we'll get into application, applying what we've learned, and then the main thing in this lesson is to revisit that concept of having grit, persevering, not just giving up on problems, and looking at your notes as a resource. So, having said that, the review of flipped learning and the process, take notes, practice and check, and then apply that to other problems and other problem-solving activities. So in review also, we have learned that to solve equations with two or more steps, we apply the inverse operations in the reverse order. And so remember, inverse operations are just opposites. The opposite to addition is subtraction. Subtraction is addition, the opposite of multiplication is division, and the opposite of division is multiplication. And so we should know that by now as well. So let's get into some problems and get right to it. So here in our first problem, we notice that we're dividing and we're adding. So we're currently dividing by 2 here, and we're also adding by 3 here. So we're going to do the opposite of that in the reverse order. And so what we're going to end up doing is subtracting 3 on both sides. What we do on one side, we must do on the other. And so that leaves us with a rather easy equation in that we're doing just the opposite. And we're utilizing a calculator if we need to. But then our answer is x is equal to 32. And so this should be pretty familiar to us. So let's do a couple more, and then I'll have you try some on your own. So this one has a decimal, but the things don't change. We're going to do the opposite operation. So in this one, because we're dividing, we're going to multiply both sides by 3. And then we're going to be doing the opposite to addition, which is subtracting. And then we have the answer of 3.5. Don't be afraid to get your calculators out. Don't just guess. I want to make sure that we're utilizing our tools. In this case, 6 minus 2.5, I know is 3.5. The next one, again, opposite operations in reverse order. And so I'm going to add 12 to both sides. That goes to 0, and I'm left with 16r is equal to 8, and then divide by 16. And r is equal to, reduce the fractions when you can. And of course, we also know we could theoretically put this as a decimal if we wanted. And so this should all be familiar to us, one and two-step equations. Okay, we're going to do a couple more examples, and then we're going to have you do some practice on your own. All right, so number 3. I do notice that in number 3 here, I notice that there are two separate j terms. So I've got to add like terms first. So 2 minus 4j, that's going to be negative 2j. And then I'm going to subtract 10 on both sides, just as I did in the previous examples, trying to get the j variable by itself. And so when I do that, I get negative 2j is equal to a negative 2, is equal to a 2. And then I divide by a negative 2, and j then becomes equal to negative 1. And be careful with the negatives. In an earlier problem, I did forget that negative. And so be careful when you bring those down that you also include those when you're solving. Okay, so that's an area of, if you're not paying attention, you can make a mistake. Number 4, my first step is going to be add, oops, sorry about that. It's going to be add 10 to both sides. And basic arithmetic here, 15, use a calculator. Use a calculator if you want to check your answers, or just feel at ease that you've made the right calculations here. And if I add 10 to both sides, this obviously goes to 0, and I'm left with 1/3 x. Then I'm going to, since I'm dividing by 3 basically, because fractions and division are the same, I'm going to multiply by 3 on both sides. And I get 45 is equal to x. Let's look at number 5. Again, there is a negative. Be aware of this negative here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to multiply by 5 on both sides. And I get 60 is equal to a negative d. From there, what I'm really doing is I'm dividing by a negative 1, and there is a 1 there, and so we divide, and that goes to d is equal to a negative 60. All right, so we want to make sure that we're seeing how come I'm dividing by a negative 1, because there is a negative that's there, and so in this next problem, that's going to come up again. All right, here we go, last problem. And this gives us an opportunity to look at and review fractions. Initially, we're going to start like we have done before, where we're going to isolate the variable, and we're going to start by subtracting 3 on both sides. And we do notice that that comes to 0, and we're left with a negative x over 3. This subtraction sign turns into that negative, so don't forget that. Over here, I'm going to rewrite this as negative 3 plus 1/5. And this is where we're going to review adding and subtracting fractions. We have to have a common denominator. And so our common denominator is going to be 5. And as long as I multiply top and bottom by 5, I can find a common denominator. And then it's just arithmetic. Negative 15 plus 1. And from here, we can handle this a couple different ways. Probably the most straightforward is going to be to go ahead and multiply both sides by 3. And when I do that, I'm left with a negative x. And then on my calculator, 3 times 14. Well, that's a negative 42 over 5. And as I showed in the previous problem, because this is negative, I'm going to divide both sides by negative, which ultimately means the same thing as multiplying by negative 1 on both sides. And x is equal to a 42 over 5. And you can leave it like this, or you can put it as a mixed number, or even a decimal. But that's going to round out our review of 1 and 2 step equations, and the rest are going to be assigned in class, which ones I want you to do for practice, and we'll come back and get together in just a little bit. All right, remember, use your notes as a resource.